Thank you. I'm Samantha Bosshart, the Executive Director of the Saratoga Springs Preservation Foundation. I want to welcome all of you tonight. And one second. Phone is ringing. Sorry about that. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you attending this program. Before we get started, I just want to give a brief overview for some of you who may not be familiar with the Preservation Foundation. I would ask that people be sure to mute their microphone. Yep, please mute. And so the Saratoga Springs Preservation Foundation was founded in 1977 to promote the architectural and cultural landscaped heritage of Saratoga Springs. We do this through educational programs such as what we're doing tonight, and through our walking tours that we do every summer and fall, each Sunday. So if you haven't attended one of our strolls, I encourage you to check those out next summer. We also provide technical assistance to building owners, as well as advocate for best preservation practices before our land use boards. We review new construction, exterior alterations, and demolition throughout the city. Mostly. And then we do restoration projects. And one of our hallmark restoration projects was the restoration of the Spirit of Life and Spencer Trask Memorial, as well as 65 Phila Street, which is our current project, the long neglected house built in 1851 by Alexander A. Patterson, who owned a spring and was a builder and architect, and the house was built in 1851. It was later a Jewish boarding house and was abandoned for more than 20 years. And we are currently doing an exterior restoration of that building. And so if you haven't been down Phila Street, I encourage you to go by there and check out the work. We finally have some windows in the building and the porch is being restored. And it's been very exciting for me and for others who've been involved with the project. I want to thank everybody who donated to this program. We appreciate that people are willing to do that and to help support our programs and our efforts here at the foundation to protect our amazing community. With that, we are a membership-based organization. So if you're not a member, I would encourage you to become one. It comes with several benefits, and such as discounts to our events. You'll get notice of all of our upcoming activities, and you can help us just be a stronger voice for preserving what's important to our community. Again, I will just ask that you be sure to keep your microphone off during the program. I know there's lots of family members and people connected to the places that Carol's going to talk about this evening. And so I ask that those people, we will hold a lot of those comments till the end, because I'm sure there's much to share. With that, if you have any questions in the meantime, I would ask that you use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen. You may need to move your mouse or tap your screen to see the chat option, but please, we'd also we'd love for you to, as we get started with this program, to type in where you're coming in from, where you're visiting. I understand we may have people from California and Colorado and other places. So we would love to have you share where you're tuning in from. If you are local and you are tired of Thanksgiving leftovers, Brook Tavern tomorrow night will be donating 25% of the food sales for both dine-in and takeout to benefit the foundation. So I would encourage you guys to come out and support us, have a good meal, and be done with your turkey leftovers from Thanksgiving. We do want to celebrate all of the history of our community, and that even begins with, we like to acknowledge that we are located on the ancestral lands of the Mohican and the Mohawk and the Abernathy people. So we want to share that, and we want to share all of our histories, and that's really important that we do that. With that, I'm really excited about tonight's program. I have been in this role for many years, and I have heard about all of these bars from many people. And sadly, they didn't exist when I arrived here. And I'm certain I would have frequented them had they still been here, because I love to have a good beverage. And so I'm really excited about this program, and I'm sure many of you are as well, because I'm sure you're going to have a lot of fond memories of these places. With that, I want to share just briefly, the foundation was founded in 1977, and it was at a time when Saratoga doesn't look like today. And I'm sure many of you are on this Zoom know what Saratoga looked like in the 70s and the early 80s. And with that, I would just say, downtown, was threatened with a bypass. There was the mall. There was all these different things that were impacting our downtown. And it was a group of community leaders that came together in the early 1970s to form the Saratoga Plan for Action. And they really came together to figure out how to revitalize our downtown. And we are so fortunate for these community leaders who came together. And one of the things that came out of the Saratoga Plan for Action, which I don't think many people realize, was the foundation was established. And it was established in part because they recognized that the historic buildings were a key part of its revitalization, and that there needed to be a voice for those buildings, and we needed somebody to help manage a facade easement program. And that facade easement grant program provided building owners with money to restore their buildings and restore the exterior of their buildings. Some had changes over the years, and it provided funding. And in exchange, any exterior changes to that building for the next 25 years, the foundation had a say on how the building looked to make sure it retained its historic appearance. And the foundation helped to preserve 25 downtown buildings in Saratoga Springs. And one of those buildings was the Granite Palace, where DeAndrea's was located. So I want to just share that little bit of history so that you guys can recognize that the foundation has had an important role with downtown. Some people may not know that. And with that, I want to introduce you to our presenter, Carol Godette. We are so fortunate to have Carol do these programs for us regularly. She's amazing, and she's a great at uncovering these places that you guys all are familiar with, and some of us who have heard about but never had the opportunity to visit. She has lived here with her husband on Nelson Avenue and her childhood home, where they raised 2 children. She taught the 5th grade for 31 years at both Greenfield Elementary and Lake Avenue schools. She is the co-owner of the local Ben & Jerry's franchise and was the first recipient of the Saratoga County History Award in 2022. Carol also serves on the board of the Saratoga County History Museum. She's written a history column entitled On This Spot for Simply Saratoga for the past 7 years, and is working on her final edits for a book called On This Spot, Saratoga Springs. And in addition to all of this, tonight we found out that Carol was a reigning foosball champion in 1975 at DeAndrea's. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carol, and I hope everyone enjoys the evening. And please let us know if you have questions or comments. Please feel share them during the chat box, and we'll circle back to those at the end of the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sam. And next to me, I'd like to think we're little co-anchors. I have Jeannie O'Farrell, who's going to also be talking mostly about the hub, and we'll talk about that why soon. Yeah. So she's going to be throwing in some comments with me. And I was so surprised when I saw all of these names of people that I knew growing up. And also a little intimidated because we've got 2 families who started these bars who know far more about them than I do. So we're going to invite these families, the DeAndres and the Cogans, at the end of this presentation to say some words if we left something out or if there's something they felt needed to be said. So as you look at this title slide, we had a lot of questions when we put this in the newspaper. People were like, why aren't you doing the Golden Grill? Or why aren't you doing the Tin and Lin? And well, Saratoga, as you know, recently from that New York Post article, I don't know how many of you saw that, but it said that we have the highest percentage of heavy drinkers in New York State in Saratoga Springs. I don't know exactly where they got this information from, but they said 24% of adults here drink heavily. But bars have always been around. So I'm not sure if that's exactly true that we have that much, but bars have always been popular here. But what my passion has always been is to write about mom and pop businesses. And I really feel Saratoga is what it is today because we had all these mom and pops who were willing to put their livelihood on the line and give tirelessly to create wonderful businesses that we could all love. And certainly these bars were three of those. I also chose rather than some of the other ones because two of these are in buildings that no longer exist. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The Hub and of course the Rafters. DeAndre's, as Sam said, is in the Granite Palace. And so here's my first question. So I have some prizes to give away tonight. And my first question is, DeAndre's is in the Granite Palace, but what exactly is the business that's in the same spot that DeAndre's was in? So I'll give a second in the chat box. And Nicole, you're gonna have to tell me if we have any winners.
We got
Does
91
anybody know?
people.
Well, I'm going to have to check the responses because I can't see the chat responses, but it's Joseph A. Banks. So as you look at it, and the reason I brought this up is I literally, when people read the press release in the newspaper, they stopped me on the street walking their dogs and they said, well, you're doing DeAndre's. I'm really confused because there's a DeAndre's I walk by all the time on Caroline Street. Is this a different DeAndre's? It doesn't look like the DeAndre's I know. And well, it was a different DeAndre's. This bar was on Broadway, but it was owned by Frank and his brother, Joe, and Joe's son, Frank, also. 15 years after DeAndre's closed, he kept hearing all these comments from people. We love the pizza at DeAndre's, and I love the pizza at DeAndre's. And can't you recreate that? So Frank, in August of 1993, decided to open up a DeAndre's pizza shop. And that's what you know on Caroline Street. Frank ran that for many years. And I believe he's on tonight. And hopefully we can hear from him a little bit later from California. And he ran that and then sold the business. The family kept it for a while. But what was nice about it is he kept that original recipe. So that's DeAndre's. You could visit it, but when you look at Joseph A. Banks and those sweaters and the shirts, it's just not quite the same. So when you want, my husband and I met in a bar. We met in Desperate Annie's. So if we want to ever recreate what it was like, we can walk in there and it's kind of basically the same. But if you have nostalgia and you want to go back to a favorite spot that you have great memories of, you can't go back to these places. But my goal for you tonight is, if you did have memories from these places, that maybe it will rekindle some good memories for you. If you grew up someplace else, perhaps it will jog your memory of a similar experience, because I think some of the stories we're going to talk about were universal experiences. This was played out all over the country because in the pre-social media days, these places were our living rooms. So today, as you see, we're going to hear from a few guests throughout the presentation. So let's take you to what Sam talked about. And I believe she's on this call. Patty Krupp was a college student in 1976. And for her January term project, she did Broadway, the architecture of Broadway, and she took these fabulous pictures, and I've used them in a couple other presentations before. And here's DeAndre's in 1976 with her photo. And you can see Broadway was in the period I call Broadway was bleak. Broadway's looking a little bleak here, but thanks to hardworking families like the DeAndres, we had wonderful places to go to. And if you look there, you see two doors. And the door to the right near Wells Pharmacy was where you walked in, and that's the bar side. And the door to the left, the smaller one near Roxy's Cleaners, was the restaurant side. These were, as I said, our living rooms. It's a place where we shared stories. It was the heart of Saratoga. Let's take a look at it now. And as Sam had mentioned, here it is today, a little more uniform and a little more pleasant looking, but you still see those beautiful arched windows. So Joseph A. Banks, where you look here, this side was the bar and this side was a restaurant. So I don't think when I was playing foosball in that basement, I ever envisioned that it would look like this. So here's DeAndre's, and I had a wonderful talk with Joe. Joe lives in Florida now, and we spoke from Marco Island the other day, and he had some wonderful stories, and I'll try to share what he said the best I can. But first of all, and I started looking at the names of people attending on the program, and we have Tom Ruin on here, and the DeAndres, lots of them. And we have the Cogans, lots of them. And I kind of laughed to myself and I said, you know, when I grew up in Saratoga, Jeannie, you too, half of our population was either a Cogan, a DeAndre, or related to the Ruins. Yeah. And so the DeAndres, there were 13 children in the DeAndres family, and they were all pretty much mom and pop business owners. Rosemary Carr DeAndre, or Rosemary DeAndre Carr, owned Starbucks department store, which was just down the street. Their brother Faust had the liquor store. And of course, Joe and Frank had DeAndre's restaurant. But if you look carefully, there's a sign up on the building, and I'll try to highlight it there. And that's Bobby DeAndre, who I believe is also on today. And this is when he was running for supervisor. And Joe laughed and he said, well, you know, you got to put your brother's sign up on the wall. You got to support him. But this was a whole family operation. Sometimes Lou, one of the brothers that I had for driver's ed, did you have him? No. Yeah, okay. I've talked to many people who said, yep, Lou DeAndre taught me how to drive. So Lou was on the door checking IDs at times. It was a whole family operation. When Frank and I talked about the pizza operation that he had here, he was laughing. He said, well, yeah, my dad was there all the time. And so thus I was there a lot. And he said, I remember having my 12th birthday party there. And in DeAndre's, the upstairs was there for a long time before Joe decided to open up the downstairs called the Ratskeller. And that's where I hung out as a college student. And it was painted black. There was a foosball table, a service bar. We're going to see a famous wall that was there, a jukebox, and a dance floor. And you probably didn't want to be there when the lights came on because it wasn't as pretty as it was when the lights were off. But he said, I remember having my 12th birthday party there, dancing to that sticky, stale beer floor. And we were laughing about that. Besides the dining room, it was also known, of course, for their pizza. But another part of DeAndre's was Skidmore. And again, to put it in context, Skidmore College was all females. And I know we have some former Skidmore students on tonight. And when it was an all-female college, that drew males from all neighboring colleges, Union, Colgate, you name it. And what the DeAndres did, and this was a story that Joe had lots of laughs over, was called their sour hour. So on Thursday nights, they had whiskey sours, and Joe would mix them up by the gallons the night before. And the lines literally went all the way down Broadway as people waited to get in. And he had to have 7 bartenders on Thursday nights. The happy hour lasted from 4 to 6, and whiskey sours were a quarter. Hard to believe. And they were served on trays. And I know Jack Cogan is on this. And although he later had a bar, which we're going to talk about, the Hub, he was a bartender there. And he described in detail about taking trays of these whiskey sours out and serving them. And they would be gone as quick as he could get them out there. But one thing that Jack also said is that he learned for his restaurant how important camaraderie was. And he learned that from being at DeAndre's. And when I think back to DeAndre's, that's one of the words I would use to describe it. It was a place of camaraderie. Joe had it open 365 days a year. When he came on as a partner, and he was 20 years younger than his brother, Frank, who had opened it. When he came on as a partner, he brought some changes, and that was one of them. He knew that there were a lot of people who went there on holidays because they had no place else to go. They had no one else at home. And he wanted to be consistent and be there for them. And they appreciated that. Some other changes that he made were changes about doing some specials so he could keep the staff on throughout the winter. Sometimes winters here are long, and it takes a lot to keep a restaurant open when you don't have a lot of business. But that was something that he felt was really important. Okay, so this is the famous wall. So in the basement, when you walk down, as I said, it was painted black. This wall was huge, and I have it in 4 different slides, and it's in Margaret's house now. And perhaps at the end, she can tell us a little bit more about that. When it was after DeAndre's was sold, this was in storage, and then Frank incorporated it into his pizza shop. But after the family left the pizza shop, they took this back, this mural, because it showed everybody who was ever there. And if you look closely, you'll see Patricia McBride. There are a lot of people from SPAC went there after they had performed. And before that, Joe talked about people who were at the Little Theater who went there. So you may recognize some names. And of course, the basement was a perfect place to go. There weren't windows, it was private. And everybody who was anybody at that time eventually made their way to DeAndre's. You could see Shauna Na, Henry Mancini, and that was all in this neon pen that showed up in the dark. Here's a menu from the time when they had to just try to stay open. And even though they didn't make money, they didn't lose money, and they were able to keep their staff on. And Joe thinks that this is probably from about the 50s. And I'd love to have those $1.25 prices that they had there. Music was so important. And I think that's part of the whole allure of bars, because it was a cultural icon. Not only was it the art of murals, or whatever we wore there, but music was really important. And the jukeboxes were big at DeAndre's. He had a jukebox upstairs and a jukebox downstairs. And it was 3 plays for a quarter. And if there wasn't music playing, and they rented these machines from the Duvals, they painted quarters red. And that was so the Duvals would know that was just to keep the music going. They would hand it to a patron and say, go play some music, pick out what you'd like to play. And so that was a key thing. Another thing that made it special is DeAndre's had the first video game ever in Saratoga. It was a World War I, they believe, shooting game. And it wasn't hugely popular when they first put it in, but it was the first video game in Saratoga. Another thing that was kind of a claim to fame was that they launched the career of many people. So I'm sure many of you go into G. Willikers. Linda Ambrosini, who owns it, she got her start in working as a bartender at DeAndre's. Another thing that was really quintessential to DeAndre's was Molson beer. They became the #1 customer for Molson beer. The distributor was Joe's uncle. And again, going back to Skidmore and the popularity with Skidmore girls, at that time, and I know Patty, when you did your project, there was a 411 program. What that meant was for the January term, you only had to take one course, and all the colleges that were in this program, you could take a course at any college you wanted. And so a lot of males from other places decided Saratoga's a cool place to be because there's all these cute Skidmore girls. So Saratoga was flooded for the month of January with people coming from other colleges, and they only had to take one class. So Joe said, well, when you've only got to take one class, you don't have that much work. So they had a lot of time to spend at DeAndre's, and they drank a lot of Molson's. And so because of the January term, they were the #1 customer, which was pretty funny. I was sharing that with Jack Hogan yesterday, and he said, well, you know what? You would be surprised, but the same thing was true for me at the Hub at that time. January was our busiest month. So I always hear about dry January, but I guess that didn't happen then. So if you had any other memories of DeAndre's, I'd love for you to click it into the chat box. Now we're going to move a few blocks over to the Hub. And to me, the Hub was the place where all the cool kids went. And I've got one of these cool kids sitting next to me. She's going to talk about. Well, I say that because my dad had a fair amount of rules. I know my sister's on this one. Most of them I ignored, but the one rule that I steadfastly abided by was I was not allowed to go in the Hub. I'm not sure exactly why. He was a funeral director, and his alley where he went into the embalming room is where the Adirondack Trust Company's mortgage department is now, in the back, the other building. And he had a direct eyesight of the Hub. And apparently at some point in his life, he had to go into the Hub for a removal. And whatever he saw, he just thought this was not a place his daughter should be. And so he told me I was never allowed to go in there. So it was the one rule that I really did follow. But I really didn't like that rule because, as I said, all the cool kids went to the Hub. But let's kind of get into the background of this building, because it was really an iconic building. In a little bit, Robert Wheaton, a local artist, is going to talk. And he's done postcards of bars in Saratoga. And here's one of his postcards of the Hub. And this was in the time when one time there was a railroad, we know it's Railroad Place, a railroad going right next to the Hub. And so he recreated that in this postcard. So this building was really first deeded in 1843. And we're going to look, well, I think I'll go ahead and then come back to this picture. We're going to look like what it looked like. This is a photo from 1910. And if you look over to the left, you can see the Hub building. It's long and thin, but at this time it's a plumbing shop. And it's right next to Saratoga Coal Company. And you can see the railroad tracks here. So this is a working man's neighborhood at this time. Jack said he had a customer who was probably about 80 who used to come in when he owned the Hub, who talked about being a plumber. And he said this was during Prohibition. And after he finished his job in the back of this building was a gin mill, and they used to go there and drink. So long before it became an official bar, it was a place where drinking took place. This building, the Saratoga Coal Company, of course, is torn down. And where we see the coal lot is where we have a parking lot today. But let me go back. So you can't talk about the hub without talking about the Cogan family. And here we have a family portrait with Mrs. Cogan in the center. Jack is right above her. And Jack owned the restaurant for 20 years, but he wasn't the first owner ever of the restaurant. His grandmother owned it, and she got the building in 1954, and she ran it with her husband. And then she sold it in 1969, I believe, to Bill Eddy, Senior and Junior. So Jeannie, why don't you tell us a little bit, because Jeannie is part of the Eddy family.
Yes. I was, in 1972, a senior in high school, and my then boyfriend and future fiance got a job when he was 18, working for his brother and his cousins and his dad at the hub as a bartender. And I worked at Stewart's directly across the street, scooping ice cream. So after I'd get done scooping ice cream, I'd wash all the ice cream off my arms and change my clothes and make the night deposit at the Adirondack Trust and run over to the hub and spend a couple of hours there. And it was just so much fun. I had so much fun. For me, it was like a social outlet. It was not a place to drink, even though my very first drink was there, and it was a slow gin fizz, which was my favorite. But they also had this specialty, the Blue Max. But for me, it was about seeing people, and it just became, like Carol said, a living room. And so I would leave Stewart's and go over there for a few hours while my boyfriend was bartending, because legal drinking age was 18. So I'd spend a lot of time there and see so many people, especially at the holidays when people would come home from college. But I think my most memorable experience at the hub was, it was the night before my chemistry regents in high school. And I decided, well, what the heck, I can do two things at once. So I brought my notes and I sat at the bar and I studied for my chemistry regents because I was planning to go to Albany Medical School of Nursing. So at graduation a few days later, or a week later, I don't remember the time frame, Mr. Bouchard, my chemistry teacher, came up to me and he said, you're not going to be going to Albany Medical Center School of Nursing because you failed the regents. And I was like, oh, I should not have studied at the hub. I don't think my parents ever knew that story. But anyway, I ended up going to Adirondack Community College for medical secretarial, which I was really bad at. But that's a fun memory. But for me, the hub was a place to go to see family, cousins. My future sister-in-law, Carolyn, Eddie, and Bill lived in an apartment above the hub, and it was really very charming and very cute. I had a lot of fun with them, and it was very much a family. Like I told Carol when we first talked, it was our cheers. To us, it was our cheers. We'd walk in and you'd see people, or you'd be there waiting for your friends to come, and you'd just be watching the front door, hoping that this person or that person would make it in that night. And my two favorite features of the hub were the jukebox, where, as I got into the night and I'd run out of my tips from my pockets from Stewart's and I had no more quarters, I was known to go say, got any quarters, because I just loved the jukebox. And also the shuffleboard was a favorite activity. We really had a lot of fun with our teams and, just friends. And it was really very social. It was not really a place that I remember excessive drinking by anybody or, fights breaking out, even though those things did happen, I'm sure, now and then. But it was absolutely a social, family, friend experience. And it was just one of the highlights of my young life.
Okay, thanks. And you can see how popular it was. Jack brought out albums and albums of great photos. And here's one of them. You could see how crowded it was. And it also captures the time with the fashions. Okay, so here's my next trivia question. So here's a few things that I would sum up the hub as, because I did get to go in there later after I graduated college, and I did love to go there then. It was known for well-known bartenders, and in this photo, there's a well-known local bartender who's wearing a carnation. So if anybody thinks they know who this person is, type it in the chat box. Nicole, are we getting any answers? Not yet. We have a Rocky?
Yes.
Okay, yes, John Rockwell. Okay, who got that? Sherry Gray. All right. I thought you were going to be in Africa, Sherry. I know you're headed there. Okay, that is John Rockwell, and he was a bartender in a lot of different places, but the hub was one of them, and he's just an iconic bartender in Saratoga. And next to him is Jack's brother, Tim, who also worked there. So this was a family operation. In the upper picture to the right, you see Tim's cousin, Pam, who was a bouncer there. And so when you walk in the hub, there was a front door and a side door. Pam was usually, I guess, in the front. And she was somebody you did not want to mess with. She was right on top of that. She checked IDs and she made sure the right people came in, and she was a real asset. And kind of note the mural behind Pam. We're going to talk about that in a minute. You don't really notice it. It kind of blends in with the background. But there were lots of regulars there. There were also theme nights. So in the photo below, you see somebody dressed in a tuxedo. Well, that's Jack. And he had all different kinds of theme nights. Usually, I believe this one was in February, and it was tuxedo night. So Jack would go to the Saratoga men's store and he'd say, you know, what do you have on sale? Whatever. And he'd get the cheapest tuxedo he could every year. And so he said, hey, would you explain that? Because I don't look very fashionable there. But I think that is the quintessential 70s tuxedo. It is. And he's got a hat on. But other theme nights, the 4th April of every year, he had Beach Boy night. And did you ever go there when he, I do remember.
I remember that.
He turned the whole floor, he put sawdust down, and it was like being on a beach sand. He had a lot of funny stories. And again, this was a place where legends were made and legends were passed on. But he said one night, and you got to realize what was next door was no longer the coal place. So it was an empty parking lot. Into the parking lot pulled a car with some boys from Greenfield and a live pig. And they said to Jack, Jack, do you want to buy this pig? Well, he just played along with it and he said, sure. But then he didn't know what he was going to do with the pig. So Jack ended up riding the pig through the bar. He said it ended up underneath the shuffleboard table. It was a legend story that's still talked about today, the day that he rode a pig through the hub. And I don't think that was the night my dad went in, but maybe that's why I was never allowed to go there. I don't know. I can't say for sure. But those were the kind of memories that were created there at the hub. Also, beer nights. And I do, when I was allowed to go there, I was out of college, I can remember I was with my friend Craig Wilson. I didn't have any money on me. And he said, well, I'll lend you some money. I said, well, I'm going to the hub. How much do you need? I said, 50 cents. He said 50 cents because beers were a quarter. And a pitcher was $1.50. So beer nights were so popular. Jack said one day he was playing tennis with a local professor, Skidmore professor, Don McCormick. And Don said, you know, Jack, we had to change our schedule around. We used to have classes on Thursday mornings, but we found out that nobody was going to them because everybody went to beer night and they couldn't get up for class. So on Thursdays at Skidmore, due to the hub and the popularity of beer night, classes started a little bit later. So I guess that kind of shows you the impact of the hub. You can't talk about the hub without talking about the murals in it. And here's two murals. So this mural is just amazing. And Jack gave me a copy of it, which I'm going to get framed. I'd love to share it with you someday. But if you've never seen this mural, you need to walk into the Maybe building in the main entrance. And the first time I saw it, I was astounded because I don't ever remember really looking at it on the wall. And it's about 14 feet long and maybe 5 feet, maybe 6 feet tall. But it was created by local artist, bartender, legend. There's so much to say about him, Hud Armstrong. So let's take a look at this. I've blown up a little part to show some people that are on the call tonight. And I think a lot of people on the call are actually in this mural or the other one. Hud passed away this past spring, but before he did, he documented so much of Saratoga, and he had a tremendous sense of humor. Robert Wheaton's going to talk a little bit about him in a few minutes. But in this photo, he chose to recreate Saratoga in 1919. And I don't know with the glare on this, if you can see, there's a horse and its name is Upset. So here's where the hub was, and it's kind of in the background here. It's a long, thin building near the railroad station. And this is 1919, just after Upset, a horse, beat Man o' War. Upset was not likely to win this race, and thus the term got coined. An upset in a sporting event is when an unlikely winner does win. So he chose this time in history to recreate Saratoga, but he took it from people from 1975, which is when he created this huge mural. And all kinds of locals, either people who went to the hub, people who were politicians or well-known business owners, or his friends and family. In the front here are many of the Cogans. In this blow-up part I have down here, Tom Ruin is there, and I believe he's on tonight on the call. So it's really creating, and many of you maybe remember, if you look above Railroad Place, if you can see that, and it's a little small, is Bill McKelvey, who was our town crier. And there's a separate legend that describes who these 255 people in this mural are. Now, the amazing part about this is that Hud at this time lived for an entire year rent-free upstairs. Jack let him live there rent-free, so he could come down for a few hours every day before he had to go off to work. And he was a bartender at various places. And he would go and he would just draw in a few of the people and then go off to his job. So it took an entire year to create this mural, but it is truly a work of art. And I think it's so wonderful that when the hub closed, that it was preserved, that it was taken down and still preserved and still there today. And in the key, it talks about some of the legends of the hub, about the foosball table and some of the people there. The other mural, and I have it here too, in a picture that Jack gave me, was it was in two different places. He had to move it. It used to be near the kitchen, but it was on the other wall. And this was just a cast of characters who hung out at the hub. And I see one of them, I believe is on the call tonight, Vicki Green. And this is Vicki. She had long red hair. And if you are in this mural, would you please type it in the chat box so we can all see? It is really a true work of art. And here's a Saratogian article about HUD's characters. He also has a book out, and Robert Wheaton's going to talk about that in just a second. Here's Robert's other postcard of the hub, showing the hub and, of course, what we now know as Country Corner. And this corner looks very different. And what I love about Robert's work is that he takes quotes from locals and he puts it on the back of his postcards, which you can buy at Suave Fair, but lots of action on these two corners, from the Hub Club to the Breakfast Club at the crack of dawn. So Robert, I believe you're on the call, and Nicole, can you unmute him and put it over to Robert? And we'll be hearing from him in just a second. Nicole, do you have him?
Okay.
Okay.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you're unmuted. You're ready to go.
All right, thank you. His book. Very happy that I got to meet HUD. Met him about 3 or 4 years ago. Came in the Suave Fair and asked him if he wanted to do some live demos. So I did probably half a dozen or so time-lapse videos of him working on his characters, baseball games. I was amazed that he used acrylic paints like watercolors. Didn't know you could do that. There's no rules in art. But it's funny that you mentioned that HUD rent-free above the hub, and I recreated, I don't know if you can see this, but he lived on the top floor, and he always made it a habit when he used the bathroom to peek out the window. So I put a shadow in the window above this print of the hub that I did of him. The painting, the postcard that was prior to this one, Kathleen Cogan Keeney, she's the one that commissioned that painting of that particular hub view. I had to do a little bit of research to see what buildings were around it at the time of the railroad, and I found out there was a taxi stand, a barber shop there, and that's about that. Also, I did
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, you're welcome.
In order to survive, and here's a great other sign, and Chip Wagner, who's on, sent this in, and he has this sign in his garage, I believe. Thank you for sending that in. Jack had to keep reinventing himself. And any business owner, I know the DeAndre said they always had to keep trying new things. And the same was true at the Rafters. So he had to reinvent himself to keep things going, to keep himself from not being bored, and to keep business and keep it fresh for customers. So there was a phase where he called it Cajun Jack's Hub. And he did all kinds of Cajun cooking. Here you can see a little bit of the menu. And I read some restaurant reviews. I was really impressed. I wished I had eaten there. He was and still is an excellent cook. He also had a semi-pro baseball team that did quite well. And after they won games, of course, they would come in. But despite all this, after about 20 years in the business, Jimmy Doyle offered to buy the building from him. And Jack ended up selling it to him. The hub continued on. For a while after that, it changed a few names. It was called the Hub Club, Saratoga Clam and Oyster Bar. and Dugan's for a short while. But for most of us, it was always follow me to the hub. And here's a matchbook from it that, again, was sent in to us, and bumper sticker. So after these different trials that was never quite the same as it was when Jack had it, in 2002, Tom Ruin bought the building and eventually sold it to the Adirondack Trust Company. And this is where the preservation came in and had some things to say about it, because this is such a key corner in Saratoga. And at first, they didn't have clear-cut plans in place, and they had to go before the design review committee, and they were turned down. And Sherry, maybe you were on the design review board at that time, I'm not sure. I know you are now. Carrie said, well, it's significant was hold the street line, but then the plans for the Maybe building came into place and it was accepted. I'm sure it was a sad day for many people in November of 2004 when the building was taken down, and Ed Burke did a great job in these photos capturing what it was like taking this building down. We're fortunate that now we have a beautiful Maybe building in its place, but forever in our hearts, the hub will live on. I do, again, encourage you to walk in this beautiful building, the main entrance, and look at the tribute to the hub. And I'm glad that the hub still lives on through the Maybe building. Okay, now we're gonna drive out to Saratoga Lake to a bar that was known from Montreal to New York City. From 1973 to 1987, the Rafters existed. It overlooks Saratoga Lake. And here's a shot of it. And I want you to look at these glass windows, because I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Now, for those of you who didn't live here then, I got to put it in context for you. And this was owned by Will and Jen Roble and Bobby DeAndre, who's also on the call tonight. Cateros Park was owned by them, and it was a wonderful amusement park. And I believe this is a 1954 postcard, but just to give you the frame of reference, the Rafters was up here in this grove of trees, and it overlooked a cliff overlooking Saratoga Lake. And it was a really popular destination. So Greg Roble was a college student at the University of New Mexico, and he was in his second year of architect school. And he asked his parents and Bobby if he could build a project for his class. And he had this vision of creating a place that would draw you in and keep you there. And I really love what he did with it and the materials that he used. So if you're not quite sure what area I'm talking about, today it's Water's Edge condominiums. So here we are inside, and we're looking from an upstairs second floor balcony down into the bar. And unfortunately, Greg passed away this past February, but before he died, I had done a story on this for Simply Saratoga. And I was looking back at my notes today, and we just had some of the best interviews. And he had throat cancer, so sometimes he couldn't talk, and he would write these long, beautiful narratives about his experience in it all, building the Rafters and what he was trying to create. So what was unique about it? It was both inside and outside visually magical. Here's the patio. And I just have to read to you what he wrote to me about this patio. And I've got to find those notes. But basically he said that here was a place essentially in the middle of nowhere. And he wanted to create a place that would draw you there and keep you there. And he really did. Of course, at that time, disco was coming in. And here you can see the disco floor. And before I talk too much about the structure, I've got somebody here who was iconic. Sig Wynne-Evans and her partner, John, were regulars on the dance floor. And if any of you ever went to the Rafters, you probably remember seeing them kind of seem to magically appear out of the fog dancing. John was an actor, and he, if you look at his hat, he created a hat for Janis Joplin on her Pearl album. And he used these pink feathers and white feathers, and he saved them and wore this hat that got him the name Feathers. And Sig was his unlikely dance partner and later became his life partner. And I was able to track her down in California, and she's agreed to talk tonight. So Nicole, could we unmute Sig and have her share some of her stories about the Rafters?
Hi, can you hear me?
Just let me know when she's on.
Hello. Shut up. Shut up.
Sig, we can hear you.
You hear me and the dog.
You and the dog.
Sorry, you know, they were quiet until just a moment ago. Shut up. Shush. So I'd like to know, I met John when he was dancing. He just kind of came out of the dance, the fog, and we met and we started dancing, became friends, and just started visiting every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday nights. We were pretty much there. John loved the place so much. He had hoped that his ashes would be strewn about the Rafters, because that was how much of a magical place it was for him. And it became that for me too. We had some of the best times there. And the funny thing is most people didn't know much about us. Some people thought that John owned the place. Some people thought he was a professor at Skidmore. I don't know what they thought I was, just a hanger-on, I guess. But I know we were such an enigma for so many people, but we were just regular people. And John just liked to dress up. So then he got me dressing up to go with him too. So, but yeah, we loved the dancing, and we always had a good time, always. Okay.
Thank you, Sig. I know that Facebook has kept the Rafters alive, and I think there's at least 1,600 fans that regularly post, and Sig's name and John's name often come up. So they were on this dance floor that was created and had to be cooled, because you can imagine how hot these lights would get. So they had to be water cooled underneath. It was a 25-foot in diameter circular dance floor that he got from Brooklyn's Navy Yard. And I loved how he sourced the material. And I think I showed you the windows. The windows came from the John Hancock building in Boston. Maybe some of you remember that in 1972, these windows started falling out because when it was designed, it hadn't really factored in the wind. And what happened with this tall building with these 50-inch by 10-foot tall insulated glass panels, that they didn't hold when the wind came, and they started falling out. So a reclaimer went and took all these windows, and Greg was able to buy 50 of them that he bought for $100 each, and he got them back and he incorporated them into the Rafters. And this was quite a task because they were so heavy. He needed 6 men with suction cups to actually install them. Another part of the Rafters was there was a motorcycle hanging from the rafters, from the wooden rafters, and it's just above here in this photo. That was a 650 BMW motorcycle that reminded Greg of an accident he had that had him in traction for 3 months. So everyone always remembers that as well. But the Rafters was more than just a bar. Bobby DeAndre used it sometimes to announce that he was going to run again. He was our assemblyman from 1974 to 2001. So he would often have a press conference there. Lots of groups. I remember having my class reunion there. Weddings were there. And I came across this article about the Fruit and Flower Mission had their dinner dance there. They were also involved in community events and nationwide events. And there was a campaign the Mothers Against Drunk Driving had against the term Long Island iced tea because they thought it sounded harmless. People thought, but they didn't realize how potent this drink really was. And the bartender joined right in from the Rafters against the terming of Long Island iced tea and serving them there. So they also had lots of social causes too. I can't thank you enough for attending this. And I can't thank Jack Cogan and the DeAndre family for sharing all the information, for Jeannie sharing information. But I'm sure that many of you have some memories or some questions. So this would be a great time to put it in the chat box. And I think we'll start with the DeAndres. If any of the DeAndres would like to make a few comments, if you raise your hand, Nicole can unmute you, either Frank in California or Bobby or Joe, or if the Cogans would like to have a few comments. I know we've got a couple different Cogans on as well. Or if you just have any general questions for us, we would love to answer them. Or for Robert. Nicole, do we have anything? Not yet.
One question is, did Rafters close because the land was being developed? But I feel like the building sat empty for a while.
Okay, that's a great question. And I did mean to address that. The Rafters did close because the Robles and Bobby DeAndre sold it, and they did decide to have it developed. Again, as I said, owning one of these businesses was demanding. You didn't get to have a lot of personal life. And I think after a while, many business owners just said, you know, it was a good run and it's time for us to leave. And I think perhaps that's what happened. Maybe they could address the answer better than I could. What year?
Yep.
It closed. Yeah, and I had that in the title slide. So they had the Rafters until I believe it was 1987. And that's when it closed.
Do you know how long after that the building was torn down?
I do not, but maybe Bobby would. That's one thing. As I said, I had extensive notes from Greg, and we didn't really talk so much about that part of the Rafters life. Any other questions?
Somebody asked, was the Colonial Tavern in the same location as DeAndrea's?
No, but I thought that at first too, because I can remember going to the Colonial Tavern with my father's business partner, Jim Burke. And that was just down the street from DeAndre's. And I believe the Colonial had a fire. And so, you know, that vacant lot, it was more next to Wells Pharmacy. And that's where the Colonial was.
Someone just shared, Enid just shared, when I was attending Skidmore, Jack would have a brunch at the Hub for Happy Pappy Weekend. Having spent the evening before at the bar, my father playing shuffleboard with other fathers and locals, when we went for brunch, my father's comment was, if he realized what the Hub looked like the night before, he may not have gone in, but brunch was delicious. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, are you on mute, Sam? Could everyone hear that?
I don't believe I'm on mute.
Great. Anything else? Well, thank you so much for attending, and keep stories coming, and so we can keep these wonderful places alive. And I hope that you either learned something or remembered something that just brought a smile to your face.
Somebody just asked, my question is to Joe DeAndrea, what is your favorite memory from DeAndrea's restaurant?
Okay, Joe, what is your favorite memory from DeAndre's restaurant?
My favorite memory would be.
So Joe is watching it with many of his relatives.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My favorite memory was when my wife and my children would come down and have a pizza with me when I had a chance. And that's basically the few times I would see them during the season. I spent most of my time right at the restaurant during the season. And it was nice to see my kids, make sure I still remembered them.
That's a great memory. Love it, Dad. That's great. He said, when did Joe go in the morning, and how late was he there?
Which said,
when did you go in? What time did you go in? And
in the season, which I call the season of the summer, I would go in about 5 o'clock in the evening, but I wouldn't get out until about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning after cashing out and that type of thing. But then when I got home, if I could go to sleep, I would get up and do book work. I had to get the payroll done. My brother Faust said, "You do all the payroll and the bookkeeping. We don't send that out for anybody else to do." So when he handed me over his management chores, he also handed me those statements. So in other words, when I would wake up, I'd get ready to go back into work during the season. In the off season, I would probably go in at 5 again, and I would leave about between 3 and 4 in the morning, depending upon. I just wanted everybody to know that DeAndre's was open all the legal hours, and if they could always say to their friends, I know DeAndre's open, so I'll meet you there at 12 o'clock.
Thanks for sharing. Well, if there's no more questions, we will thank Carol again for taking the time to have this trip down memory lane. And so we appreciate her, and we appreciate all of you that tuned in tonight and who helped support this by making a donation. And again, just a friendly reminder that we are a membership-based organization, and we can help preserve the social history by helping to tell these stories through presentations like this, or our walking tours, or by preserving the buildings that some of these great institutions that were throughout our city. So we hope you'll join us as a member. And again, thank you for a good evening and happy holidays. Take care. Good night.